I'm Becky L. McCoy, and you're listening to Stories of Unfolding Grace, the podcast about good things that happen during really difficult times. I hope that by listening to these stories, you'll feel encouraged and inspired that you can bravely live through hard things too. Talking with my friend Niki Hardy about her battle with colon cancer. We talked about what it's like to be the one suffering when you're in a position of leadership and why it is so important to be willing to be vulnerable. Here's my conversation with Niki. I'm here today with Niki Hardy of NikiHardy.com. And Niki, why don't you share with us a little bit about a difficult season that you've experienced?
Yeah, well, about 5 years ago now, I was diagnosed with cancer, and it came hot on the heels of losing my sister, Jo, to cancer. She died New Year's Eve 2011-12, and so I was diagnosed just 6 short weeks after we'd lost her, and I'd also lost my mum to cancer. So yeah, it kind of felt like the heat-seeking missile of cancer was now locked on my forehead. And to top it all off, my cancer didn't come with pretty pink pom-poms and pink ribbons. Mine was rectal cancer. Mm-hmm. So that kind of was difficult as well. So we had no idea how all that was going to pan out. So not only was I still reeling from the grief of my sister, which of course then kind of uncovered the grief of my mom, but then hardly having time to process that, I was then thrown into all the, medical onslaught of chemo, radiation, surgery. I had an ostomy bag, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a bit of a tough season.
Yeah, for sure. And how old were your kids at the time?
Good question. They were 14, 12, and 9. Yeah, so we got boy, girl, James, Sophie, and Emma.
Yeah, and already at a hard time in life for all three of them. Never mind having this extra thing thrown in there.
And when they heard the word cancer, the people they knew that had cancer died quickly.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. When I hear people getting a diagnosis, I'm like, okay, take a deep breath. Cancer does not mean terminal.
Yeah.
For everyone in my life, it has, but not for everyone.
Yes.
So how did you react emotionally to getting this diagnosis that had already kind of wreaked havoc in your family, even if it was a different cancer?
I think I kind of reacted in equal and totally opposite ways, both at the same time, which was a little bizarre. So on the one hand, I was really angry. I was angry with God, life, the universe, everything. We'd moved our family from England, where we had, extended family, loads of friends, to come to America to plant a church. And it just felt like, what? We've done all this for you? First my mom, then my sister, we've moved our life for you, God. What on earth is going on? But at the same time, there was just this kind of inexplicable, to call it a peace is probably a little extreme, but I just somewhere deep inside, I just knew it was going to be okay. I didn't quite know how or why I knew that. And that didn't necessarily mean I was convinced I wasn't going to die. I just knew that come what may, all would be okay. All was well with my soul, as they say, kind of thing, whatever that looked like. So I had this kind of schizophrenic emotional reaction.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, though, because I feel like when we talk about getting these really hard diagnoses, we either talk about all the negative emotions or like, but I still had hope. And like, but in reality, we feel all of those things all at the same time.
Yeah. It's not an either or. It's not once I was stopped being angry, then I had hope. It was like all bundled up, swirling around all at the same time.
For sure. How did your husband and your kids react?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like I said, the kids were coming at it with through a filter of this is not good. But right away, we decided to not hide anything from them, to be honest, and we didn't sit down and wait until we had all the facts to talk to them. We said, it came to light through having a colonoscopy, and I didn't have it because we thought I didn't have the colonoscopy because I thought I might have cancer. And so it was a complete and utter shock. I was fit, I was healthy, I'd just run a marathon. And so we started talking to the kids straight away. We said, the doctors have found something, they're not sure what it is. And I remember sitting around the kitchen table with Al, my husband, and the 3 kids and telling them this. And Sophie, our middle one, just bravely said, "Mum, are you going to die?" And at that moment, I remember thinking, I've got a choice. Either we do the hard stuff and we talk about the hard stuff, or we live in a world of half-truths and Pollyanna kind of hopefulness. And so I decided to go with the real and the hard stuff and just said, I don't know, but I do know that either way, it's going to be okay and we're going to get through this together. And so that was pretty tough. And I think, but starting off that way, starting off being truthful and talking about the hard stuff was really key to how we would rumble through the whole thing.
What did that feel like because a lot of people wouldn't sit down and talk with their kids right away about what was going on. Was that easy? Was that hard? Did you second guess that decision?
It was hard, but it was never really an option not to talk to them about it. When my mum had cancer, she was open and honest right from the get-go. And I know we were adults, but we were still children. We were still her, she was still our mum. So, and we've never really been a family of papering over things. So we were always going to talk to them, even when we were moving to America. We didn't just kind of wait and say, this is what we've decided. Right. We talked about it. But yes, it's a whole nother thing when you're talking about, actually, we don't know whether mum's going to live or die.
What did you struggle with most about being sick?
I think one of the hardest things was being needy, being helped, and being okay with receiving help. I'm hardy by name, hardy by nature, and my stiff English upper lip went into overdrive. And that was, on the one hand, really helpful. And on the other hand, it was my biggest weakness. My strength was my biggest weakness at times.
So why would you say that was a weakness?
It meant that I tried to cope alone beyond what I was helpful. It didn't allow people to love me well as they wanted to love me. It didn't allow me to receive the love that people had for me, and it didn't allow us to receive the help at first that people just wanted to give us. Yeah, but it's hard to choose to be vulnerable and to say, actually, I can't do this. And what started to happen in the beginning was that Al and I were both coping so brilliantly, and I put that in quotes. I can't air quote on audio, but
AKA brilliantly, sarcasm inserted there.
Yes. But he was coping and didn't want to show how scared he was or what help he needed or any weakness in him, because he wanted to be strong for me.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be strong for him because I didn't want to worry him, and I wanted to be strong for myself. But what started happening was he assumed I was okay, and what I needed was to be left alone. By being left alone, I assumed he didn't care, and actually us being strong started to divide us and move us further apart. And so I remember one evening when I just had to say, you know, I can't do this anymore. I need you. And as hard as it is to say, you know, I can't do this, I'm scared, I need you. And it was this big kind of, oh, and thank goodness you said that. Yes, that's how I'm feeling, you know. And I said, I don't want this cancer to divide us. It should be bringing us together. Mm-hmm. But it almost had the potential to separate us.
Once you decided that the quote-unquote being strong wasn't the way to go, how did you decide to handle it?
I think we both decided to accept help and to talk about how I was feeling, how he was feeling, how the kids were feeling, to talk about the hard stuff, and to live honestly and in the reality of, you know, when you've got rectal cancer, it's pretty undignified.
Yeah.
And it's pretty messy, emotionally and practically. And just to kind of embrace that and lean into it. And, you know, as leaders of a church, we decided to talk about it in church. And, oh, golly, the moment Al said rectum and my rectum, you know, in church, I just fell off my chair. You know, at first we started talking about cancer. And then we talked about colon cancer. And then we were like, no, it's not colon. It might be colorectal cancer, but technically it's rectal.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there and Al said, well, as many of you know, Niki has rectal cancer. And I almost slid off my chair. I mean, I know it's a medical term. We all have noses and ears and foreheads and, you know, elbows, and we all have rectums.
Yeah, but we don't like giggle over foreheads and noses and ears. Yeah.
You know, like, he's talking about it and it's mine, and it's anyway. So we just decided to lean into it and use humor, you know, and go with it. And I would share stories of, you know, the undignified that became quite hilarious on my blog, and people seemed to love that. It would break down the barriers.
Yeah, make it a little bit easier to talk about. Sometimes when we're listening to people's stories of living bravely, we think, gosh, I could never live that bravely if I had to deal with that kind of a hard thing. But I want to challenge you to rethink what living bravely means. If you're curious how brave you really are, you can take my How Brave Are You quiz. Just head to beckylmccoy.com/quiz. I know you hear this on every podcast you listen to, but it is so helpful if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast too. When you subscribe, it means that you get every single new episode without having to search for it. When you rate and review, it helps other people to find the podcast too. So when you're listening to a podcast and you see suggestions for other new podcasts, those lists of suggestions come from the rating and reviewing. So I would really love it and appreciate it if you would take 2 minutes, subscribe, rate, and review Stories of Unfolding Grace. If you're dealing with some really difficult things right now, I want to encourage you to hang in there. I wish I could reach through the speakers and give you a gigantic hug. But since I can't, I wrote the 3 truths and a lie for when life is ridiculously hard. I hope that these reminders and mantras will help you to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and hopefully life will get a little bit easier soon. So on the podcast, we define grace as good things that happen during hard times or bad times. So do you feel like there was grace during this time, and how did you see it show up?
I think one of the biggest ways was getting a deeper understanding, or not even a deeper understanding, because I don't think we had an understanding to begin with about how known and loved we are here in Charlotte. It had been a really bumpy ride moving here, and the first few years were really difficult planting the church. And we knew a lot of people when I was diagnosed, but I don't think we really had a sense of how known and loved we are. And that really came to light with people praying for us, people showing up with meals, people doing all sorts of things and reaching out in ways that I had never could have hoped or dreamed of. Mm-hmm. And that was really wonderful, really wonderful.
Do you feel like before your diagnosis, did you feel like your church and the people that you knew in the U.S. were your community, or did you still kind of feel like you were the outsiders and you weren't really connected?
I would say both. Mm-hmm. Because, when you come to plant a church, as church planters, your church is your community. It's the people mm-hmm. who you do life with. And yes, we had communities through the kids' schools and things like that. These are your people, and we had grown to know and love them, and many of them had become friends. But at the same time, as a pastor and pastor's wife, you're just in this slightly odd place where mm-hmm. for people you're friend, but you're also pastor, and that comes with quite a lot of baggage, especially here in the South. And so there's always this other untalked about layer to a friendship within a church. Mm-hmm. But people were kind of moved beyond that, which was great.
Yeah, that's really neat.
And I'd say the other place was the grace with our kids, the grace to walk through and do the hard stuff. And, there were times when physically, I'd be dealing with my ostomy bag or whatever, and it was a choice as to whether to hide what was going on or to just allow them in and to see it. And mm-hmm. and by doing that, you just go to a whole nother level in your relationship. And I think now we all are able to talk about hard things a little bit more easily.
How did you choose to live bravely and authentically as a result of having cancer? Especially having a cancer that people don't talk about or know anything about.
Exactly. I think, as I said before, I think the brave thing I did during the cancer that I tried to keep going with is to live vulnerably and to live openly and to share my story and to lean into the hard stuff and, say rectal cancer, not just cancer. But yeah, to just say, life is hard and this is what hard looks like. And it's not always rosy. And just because we have a faith and just because, we planted a church, we're not immune. And so I think for me, the brave thing is to step into that weakness and being vulnerable to me feels like weakness, but it's not.
Yeah, I would say most people probably feel, until they've experienced vulnerability with safe people, vulnerability feels like weakness.
It does, and I think the world can give the impression that if you're strong, nothing's wrong. We post pictures of our perfect families on Facebook and our wonderful holidays and when life's all tickety-boo, but we very rarely post pictures of real life. And so we get the impression that that's how it should be.
What would you say to encourage someone else in a similar situation? And I want you to think about it in a couple different ways. both the person who's getting a hard diagnosis who has lost people and who this is like dredging up a lot of grief for, someone who's in leadership, whether it be in the church or in the workplace or wherever, who is now having to deal with a hard thing in the public way. And also the people who maybe are underneath the leadership of this person going through a really hard thing. How would you encourage those three different people?
I think whether you're in leadership or not, when something really tough like this happens, you lose someone, you get a diagnosis, or you're left at the altar, whatever your hard thing is, I think the key is to not feel like you can't, I want to say thrive, you can't live life to the full until it's all finished. You don't have to just kind of wait the season out. Well, when I'm through this grief, when I'm done with this cancer, when I'm over my breakup, then life will be okay again. Then I can come alive. Then I'll start to really live again. I think there is joy and laughter and beauty in the tears, and there's rubies in the rubble, and all those kind of sayings about right in the middle. It's kind of, we're all survivors because we're still here, but thriving in the mess isn't really something that we wait for. It's more a paradox that we've got to kind of live out daily and walk in. So it's a cry, don't wait. Don't think you have to wait to feel joy or laughter again, and there's beauty and good stuff in the hard stuff. And to people in leadership, it's a fine balance, I think, between living authentically, modeling that, and helping people, the people who you lead, to go through what they're going through as you go through what you're going through, and model it, but at the same time knowing that you need a safe place, maybe just a few really safe people to help you process and get through it. I don't think the world needs any more people who have it all together. We need more people who don't, but are carrying on anyway, and who are bravely leaning into the hard stuff.
Yeah. And how about, for lack of a better word, for the followers, for the people who are watching their boss, their pastor, their whoever, this person in a leadership role going through a hard thing?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I haven't thought about it.
So what was really helpful for you? What really encouraged you, Anel?
I think one of the most encouraging things was when people took it upon themselves to do small acts of kindness without being asked. We had a lot of people say, well, let me know what I can do. And of course, I don't think it's just because we're British, but we never actually then follow through on that.
Right. Well, you don't have a running list or energy to think of what to ask who for. Yeah.
No. But we had this amazing occasion where we were sitting in our kitchen and suddenly this strange man started walking up our drive, and he had a bag in his hand, and he just knocked on the back door and said, oh, this is from my wife, Lita. And it was a meal. And Lita's a friend of mine that I had met once, and she had asked her husband to just deliver us a meal. And it was so wonderful that we felt loved and seen. And ironically, Lita was then diagnosed with cancer.
Wow.
And unfortunately passed away last year. But just the small act of kindness that they didn't wait. They didn't, we had people just pull up our rubbish bins. What do you call them? Trash cans or something like that, up our driveway. I don't know.
How long have you been in this country, Niki?
without being asked, they just walk past the house, see that it's still on the street, and just do it, or those kinds of things, or just say, I can come round and help. Can I bring you a meal? Can I mow your lawn? Can I do that? And just cards with encouragement, things like that, to let people know that they are seen and you're there for them. It's really valuable.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable with all of us and sharing your story. I know that it will definitely, it will encourage people, but it'll also, I think people will feel very validated in their experience with suffering, that we do have these common emotions and fears and stuff in the hard times. So before we say goodbye, I have a couple of fun questions for you.
Okay.
The first is, what are you loving right now?
I am loving coaching my daughter's lacrosse team. I played lacrosse all through school, and I'm so old I learnt with a wooden stick. That's how old I am. So I learnt in England, but I was coaching before I was diagnosed a little bit, and then stepped away. And I'm now coaching her and her friends in their 8th grade team. And I've just started, and it's far more than I thought work-wise. But it's just such fun hanging out with her. And she loves lacrosse. And so it's our common love language. And that's really great.
That is really great. What is your favorite meal or snack or food or...
I think I'd have to say that it would be a cup of tea, of course. But I do love my tea with a flapjack. Now, not an American flapjack. Here in the South, a flapjack's like a small pancake. But to me, a flapjack is a homemade oat bar, granola bar type thing. And I've made them forever. Our kids now make them. And they are just perfect with a cup of tea.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yes. The recipe's on my website if you want it, Becky. It's really easy.
Yeah, definitely. I'll get the link and I'll put it in the show notes. So everyone can.
Yes.
Maybe we'll create a movement. All the Stories of Unfolding Grace listeners at 4:30, wherever you are, make your cup of tea. Okay, what are you doing to take care of yourself?
Of course, the first thing that comes to mind is not enough. Not enough. I think one of the things I'm trying to do is I'm debating between saying run. I love to run. I'm a fresh air junkie. I love running trails with my dogs, who are completely mad. And so when I'm outside and I'm in the fresh air, just everything is right with the world, and I can process and get angry, get happy, whatever. But at the same time, I like to read. I'm part of a book club, but I don't really leave myself enough time to read. I read in those few minutes before I fall asleep, so I often read the same paragraph over and over again.
Yes.
So being kind to myself looks like allowing myself to read, not just at bedtime, but at other times as well. So those two would be my go-to.
I understand. I always tell people, like, when I read, I'm just a better human. But like you, I'm not making the time to do it. So I don't know what that says. What are you doing to be brave?
A podcast for the first time.
Woohoo!
I am, to be brave, I am stepping into a whole new world with the whole blogging and writing thing. It is not my strong suit. I know you're a natural writer, English major, aren't you?
Oh, no, I studied physics. This is like the last thing I imagined doing in my life.
It's something that makes you a good writer.
I had really good writing teachers all growing up and whatnot. Yeah.
I did not. I gave up English at 16. I can hardly spell, once thought dyslexic, all those kind of things, and scientist at heart. So stepping into the writing world and I think part of the brave thing is not just writing, but putting it out there.
Yep.
And because people might not like it. And so that's kind of a vulnerable place for me.
Yeah. So Niki and I met through Hope Writers, which is the writing group that we're both part of online. And Yeah, it is definitely scary to be like, okay, I have all these words. What do I do with them? Share them with people. What do you mean? Like,
Exactly. And people get to say whether they like them or not.
right, yeah. But I don't know about you. I feel like I can pretty safely assume this, having the safe place of Hope Writers to process through all of this stuff. I feel like life-changing that sounds a little bit like hyperbole, but not really. Like,
Oh.
I wouldn't be able to do any of this if I didn't have that community.
No, I totally agree. It's a place to say, how do I do this on my website, as well as I'm having a bad day, nothing's coming together, I'm feeling scared, and, I shouldn't be doing this, I'm a nobody. And you're just flooded with encouragement and practical help, and
yeah,
it's fantastic.
Well, thank you again for sharing. As we said before, you can find her all over the internet, but especially at nikihardy.com, and all that information will be in the show notes. I'd really love to connect with you. You can find me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, all the things, at Becky L. McCoy. You can also find me on my blog, beckylmccoy.com, and you can sign up to be on my email list. It's a really fun way to connect, and that way you won't miss a single podcast episode or blog post, and you get special ahead of time announcements like new products in the Brave Shirt Shop. Next week, I'm talking with author Anna LeBaron. As a kid, she escaped a polygamous cult, and life didn't necessarily get easier, although it got better after she left, for the most part. We talked a lot about what it's like to grow up in an abusive situation as a child, and the amount of work that it takes to transition to a healthy life as an adult. We're not going to be able to talk about the details of her life in the cult because there's just not time for that in an episode. But you can grab a copy of her book, The Polygamous Daughter. Technically, it doesn't release until this podcast is out, until her episode of the podcast is out, but stores have been shipping copies already. So check out her book, The Polygamous Daughter, and you'll hear our conversation next week. I'm looking forward to it.